The SOS goes out. The Earth was dying, the air was thick with panic. And the skies above the planet seemed darker than ever. Cities had crumbled. Oceans had risen to swallow entire coastlines. And the human race was on the verge of extinction. For years, Earth's people had tried everything: diplomacy, alliances, weapons, and even science. But nothing had worked. The alien invaders, a race of ruthless and terrifying beings, were relentless. They tore through human defenses like a knife through paper, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. The last remnants of humanity clung to hope. But it was fading fast. The planet was being devoured by a force that no one had anticipated. Their enemies were far beyond anything Earth had ever faced. These creatures did not come for resources, nor for conquest. They came because they simply could. Earth, to them, was just another challenge to conquer. And if the humans didn't act now, Earth would be lost forever. In one final, desperate move, Earth's leaders decided to do the unthinkable. They had made a promise long ago to a mysterious race, one that had always lingered in the shadows. A race known for its fearsome power, known for their brutal ways, and known for surviving in the harshest conditions. They were the Deathworlders, a race so terrifying that their name alone could send chills down the spine of any being. But now, with the planet hanging by a thread, Earth's leaders had no choice. They had to send a message, a call for help. The message was simple, urgent, and raw. It was not just a plea, it was a final cry for survival. "Help us," it said. "Earth is dying, only you can save us." The transmission was sent into the stars, hoping that somewhere out there, anyone would hear it. It was their last chance, and they all knew it. As the message echoed through the void, there was no way of knowing whether it would reach its destination or if the Deathworlders would even answer. But there was nothing left to lose. Back on Earth, time seemed to stand still. Every minute felt like an hour. People stared at the sky, their eyes searching for signs of hope. The military forces stood at the ready, but they knew deep down that the alien invaders were too powerful to be stopped by conventional weapons. Even the most advanced technology couldn't hold them back for long. Days passed, and the Earth's leaders received no response. The silence was deafening. It was as if the universe itself had turned its back on them. Some began to fear that the message had been lost in the endless void of space. Just like so many others before it, others feared that the Deathworlders would never come, that their reputation for brutality would keep them away, leaving humanity to face its doom alone. The people of Earth didn't know what to believe anymore. The world was descending into chaos. Riots broke out in the streets, and governments struggled to maintain control. The very fabric of society was starting to unravel. The alien invaders were drawing closer, and Earth's defenses were crumbling with every passing day. It was during this dark time, when all hope seemed lost, that the first sign came. It wasn't much at first, a flicker of a signal, a slight shift in the frequency of the transmission. But it was enough to give Earth's leaders a glimmer of hope. They had not been ignored. The message had been received. The Deathworlders had heard the SOS. The news spread like wildfire. There were whispers of their arrival in every corner of the world. The Deathworlders were coming. No one knew what to expect. Were they here to save them? Or was their arrival a signal that Earth had now become their next target? As the days dragged on, the uncertainty grew. Earth's leaders held secret meetings, discussing the possible outcomes. Some feared that the Deathworlders would come not as allies, but as conquerors. After all, this was the same race that had destroyed countless civilizations before them. What guarantee did humanity have that they would be spared? But others, those who still clung to hope, believed that the Deathworlders would honor their promise. They were humanity's last hope, and if Earth didn't take the risk, there would be no future left to fight for. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the answer arrived. It wasn't an army, it wasn't a fleet of ships, it was something far more terrifying. A single ship appeared on the horizon. It was massive beyond anything Earth had ever seen. Its dark, jagged silhouette loomed over the planet like a shadow. The ship seemed to swallow the light around it, making the sky itself seem darker. And as it descended, the Earth held its breath. Was this a sign of salvation, or the beginning of the end? The Deathworlders had arrived, but as the ship's engines roared in the atmosphere, a chilling thought crossed the minds of Earth's leaders. Was this really a rescue mission? Or had they just summoned a force that would bring their destruction? Even closer, there was no turning back now. The Earth had sent out its SOS, and the Deathworlders were answering. The fate of humanity rested on what would come next. Asterisk, the Airvolth ship hovered above Earth like an ancient predator circling its prey. Massive and menacing, it blocked out the sun, casting an ominous shadow over the planet. It was like no ship humanity had ever seen, dark, jagged, and devoid of any warmth. Its surface seemed to absorb the light, making it appear more like a void than a vessel. The ground trembled beneath the weight of its presence, as if the Earth itself was holding its breath. The first response from Earth's leaders was one of disbelief. This was at the moment that would define the future of humanity. But despite the enormous size of the ship, it remained silent, no communication, no signs of movement. It was like the ship was waiting for something. For days, humanity's greatest minds worked feverishly to establish contact. But there was nothing. The silence was deafening. It felt like they were standing at the edge of a cliff, gazing into an abyss, unsure of what would come next. Then, without warning, the ship released a tremor that rattled cities to their core. A low hum emanated from its hull, vibrating through the air, making every nerve in the population tighten with fear. It was as if the ship had just come alive, reacting to something deep within Earth itself. People stared at the sky in awe, a mixture of fear and fascination in their eyes, and then a message appeared on every screen across the planet. A deep, resonant voice echoed through the airwaves. "Earth," it began, its tone as cold and unyielding as the vacuum of space itself. "We are the Deathworlders. You have called. We have come." The words sent a chill through every person who heard them. The Deathworlders were real. They had heard Earth's cry, but their arrival didn't bring relief. It brought only more questions. The transmission continued, and the Earth's leader sat frozen, barely breathing as they listened. "You have bargained for our help. The price for survival is high. We do not offer mercy, nor do we offer friendship. We offer only what you need: power." The words landed like a hammer. The message was not one of rescue but of a brutal reality. Survival came with a cost. A cost that humanity might not be willing to pay. Across the planet, the world held its breath. The Deathworlders had come, but their offer was not one of salvation, but of power. The terms were not clear, and what would they demand in return? The people of Earth had no idea what the price would be. But one thing was certain: the price would be steep. As Earth's leaders huddled in their command centers, trying to understand what this meant, the Deathworlders' ship loomed above them, an eternal reminder of the choice that now lay before them. A choice between complete destruction and the uncertain promise of survival. The world's military was put on alert. They had no idea how the Deathworlders would interact with them. Would they be allies? Or was this a calculated move to bring Earth into their grip? The military leaders and politicians convened, but there was little consensus. The fear of the unknown was paralyzing, and many wondered if humanity could survive this encounter, let alone negotiate with a race so merciless. Meanwhile, the masses below continued to watch the ship, waiting for some sign of what was to come. A sense of collective anxiety gripped every person. Some whispered of their fear that humanity would become mere pawns in a larger galactic game, to be used and discarded. Others felt a flicker of hope, clinging to the idea that the Deathworlders' power could be the key to defeating the alien invaders, who had brought Earth to its knees. In the midst of this uncertainty, a small team of diplomats was selected to make contact with the Deathworlders. They were the best humanity had to offer: brilliant minds, experienced negotiators, but even they knew that this was no ordinary diplomatic mission. The Deathworlders did not speak the language of compromise. They spoke the language of power, and humanity would need to find a way to communicate in that language. The next few days were filled with tense negotiations and high-stakes meetings. The Deathworlders made their demands clear: Earth's resources, their allegiance, and their submission. They wanted humanity to understand that they were not here to play by Earth's rules. They were here to impose their own. In return, Earth would receive the one thing they needed most: survival. The price was more than just resources or power. It was a promise, one that could not be broken. Humanity would be bound to the Deathworlders in ways they could not yet comprehend. And once the agreement was signed, there would be no turning back. But Earth had no other choice. The alien invaders were closing in, and their forces were overwhelming. If the Deathworlders were their only hope, then humanity would have to make the deal. They would have to trust these brutal beings. Despite knowing the price of their aid. As the first official communication was sent back to the Deathworlders, Earth waited, breath held, for their response. And when the answer came, it was as cold and final as the void of space: "We accept your terms." The message said, "Your survival is guaranteed, but remember, there is no mercy. There is only power." The Deathworlders had arrived, and Earth's fate was sealed. Now, the only question was, what would humanity do with the power they had just been given? Asterisk: the price of salvation. Earth had made its choice. The deal was done. The Deathworlders had given their word, and humanity now stood at a crossroads. But the weight of their decision was heavy. The Earth's leaders, every person who had witnessed the solemn transmission, felt the crushing realization of what they had agreed to. The power promised to them was not a gift. It was a binding pact, one that would shape the future of Earth in ways they could not yet fully understand. As the Earth's military forces scrambled to prepare for the inevitable alien counterattack, the Deathworlders began their brutal work. Their ships, once ominous shadows in the sky, now descended into Earth's major cities. imposing their might on the very fabric of human society. Their demands were clear: resources, territory, and total control over Earth's future military strategy. They would leave humanity with the tools to survive, but only on their terms. In exchange for the Deathworlders' protection, the Earth had to deliver everything they had: gold, rare minerals, and technology. The Deathworlders took it all, but it wasn't just material wealth that they demanded. They required the Earth's leaders to sign away any sense of sovereignty. Earth would no longer act alone. The Deathworlders would hold dominion over every major decision made by humanity. The once proud nations of Earth were now under the authority of beings far beyond anything humans had ever known. But the true cost was not in the resources or the land. It was in the very essence of humanity's freedom. Earth had traded its independence for survival. And as the Deathworlders' ships loomed in the sky, the people of Earth felt the weight of this new reality settling in. People began to ask questions. Would they ever be free again? The cities were now teeming with Deathworlder soldiers, their towering figures patrolling every street. They walked with a deliberate grace, their power obvious in every step they took. Some tried to resist, holding on to the belief that humanity's spirit could not be crushed. But their resistance was futile. The Deathworlders were not cruel in the way most invaders were. They were not driven by hate or vengeance. Instead, they were driven by something far more frightening: indifference. Humanity was nothing more than a resource to be managed, and it would be kept alive only as long as it served its purpose. Earth's leaders were not blind to this new reality. They held private meetings behind closed doors, questioning the wisdom of their decision. Some feared the Deathworlders would treat humanity as little more than slaves, tools to be used in their never-ending expansion across the galaxy. The Deathworlders were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They didn't seek to destroy civilizations, they sought to control them, to shape them into something that served their needs. And humanity was no exception. Yet, there were those who still held on to a shred of hope. They believed that the Deathworlders' arrival, while costly, was their only chance at survival. The alien invaders had taken everything from Earth, and with each passing day, the threat grew more real. The hope now was that, with the Deathworlders by their side, humanity would stand a chance against this overwhelming force. The first real test of this alliance came when the alien invaders made their final assault. With the Deathworlders' ships surrounding Earth's atmosphere, Earth's forces rallied under the banner of their new allies. The battle was not a simple one. The alien forces were unlike anything the Earth had ever seen: huge, terrifying, and relentless. Their weapons seemed to tear through the air like hot knives through butter. And yet, for all their power, they were still no match for the might of the Deathworlders. It wasn't long before the first wave of alien ships fell. The skies above Earth lit up with flashes of red and blue, the sounds of the battle echoing across the world as the Deathworlders unleashed their brutal weaponry. The alien invaders were torn apart. The forces that had once seemed unbeatable were now reeling. Humanity had been granted its survival, but it came at a steep cost. The battle raged on for hours, the ground shaking beneath the feet of those who fought. Humanity's soldiers, now under the guidance of their Deathworlder commanders, fought fiercely. They had no choice. This was a fight for their very existence, and they knew it. But even as the alien forces were pushed back, a deep, unsettling thought remained in the minds of every soldier and civilian alike. What would the Deathworlders want in return for their help? For every victory won in the battle above Earth, the price humanity had paid for survival grew more apparent. Earth was no longer its own. It was under the watchful eye of the Deathworlders, who would now control everything: its resources, its military, its future. The Deathworlders had delivered what they promised: survival. But what would the cost be tomorrow? What would humanity lose in the days and years to come? As the last alien forces retreated, Earth's leaders stood on the steps of their crumbling capitals, looking out at the sky. The battle was over. The invaders had been defeated. But the victory felt hollow. The Deathworlders had kept their word. Humanity had been saved. But it had come at the cost of their autonomy. The alliance between Earth and the Deathworlders was now forged in the blood of the battlefields. And though humanity had survived, the true battle was only just beginning. The Deathworlders would not leave, they would stay, and humanity would learn to live with them whether they liked it or not. The price of salvation had been paid, and Earth would never be the same again. The battle begins. Silence that followed the retreat of the alien invaders was deceiving. Earth had won its first battle, but the war was far from over. The sky that had once been painted with the destruction of alien ships was now eerily still, as if the entire world was holding its breath, unsure of what would come next. Below, humanity celebrated, but there was no joy in their victory. The real challenge had only just begun. The Deathworlders had proven their power. They had obliterated the alien forces with terrifying ease, demonstrating their superiority in ways that no one could deny, but this victory had come at a cost. As the last of the alien ships crumbled into nothingness, the Deathworlders remained. Their dark ships hovering above Earth like an unyielding storm cloud, they had saved humanity. But what was the price for their aid? On the surface, Earth seemed calm, cities began to rebuild, and life slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy. But the new reality was one that few had truly prepared for. The Deathworlders had not left. They had stayed, their presence now as permanent as the scars left by the battle. Their ships were stationed above every major city, and their soldiers moved through the streets. Always watching, always waiting, humanity no longer had full control over its own world. The Deathworlders held the power, Earth's military leaders, now working alongside their Deathworlder counterparts, prepared for the next phase of their survival. The alien invaders were not the only threat Earth faced, far from it. The Deathworlders had made it clear that their protection was not free. It came with an agreement. An arrangement that bound humanity to them in ways that no one could have predicted. Earth had traded its autonomy for survival, but survival meant cooperation with the Deathworlders, even when it felt like everything humanity had fought for was slipping away. The first true test came when another alien fleet appeared at the edge of Earth's solar system. This time, it was not a small raid, it was a full-scale assault. Larger and more deadly than anything humanity had encountered, the invaders were back. And this time, they were coming with everything they had. The Deathworlders did not hesitate. They immediately mobilized their forces, with Earth's military units falling into line behind them. Humanity had no choice but to fight once again, but this time, the battle would be different. The Deathworlders led the charge, their ships firing with lethal precision as they tore through the invaders' fleet. But there was something unsettling in their efficiency. The Deathworlders were not here to liberate humanity. They were here to ensure their own survival, and humanity was merely an ally in their war for dominance. As Earth's forces joined the fray, it became clear that the Deathworlders would not allow Earth to engage on its own terms. They had their own strategy, one that had little regard for human lives beyond their usefulness. Earth's soldiers fought alongside the Deathworlders, but they did not have the same brutal efficiency. Earth's tactics were slower, more cautious. The Deathworlders were relentless, moving like predators in a hunt. Humanity, despite its desperation to survive, was still struggling to match their cold, calculated violence. In the heat of the battle, the Deathworlders' true nature became more apparent. They cared little for the lives lost in the fight. They were there to annihilate, to destroy, to win no matter the cost. As they tore through the enemy forces, their weapons leaving nothing but ruins in their wake, Earth's soldiers began to feel the weight of their decision. The Deathworlders were not allies in the traditional sense, they were conquerors. And Earth was now part of their domain. There was no turning back now. Humanity had chosen to survive. But at what cost? The alien invaders were retreating once again, but the battle had left scars far deeper than any of the physical damage. The Deathworlders had shown that they were a force to be reckoned with. But they had also made it clear that humanity was not their equal. Earth had survived, but the future was uncertain. The Deathworlders were not here to save humanity, they were here to use it, to manipulate it into their own vision of the future. As the final enemy ships were reduced to ashes, Earth's leaders began to question the true nature of their alliance. They had traded everything for survival, but now they had to ask themselves, had they made a deal with the devil? The Deathworlders had promised them protection, but at the cost of everything that made Earth truly human. And as Earth's leaders looked up to the skies, to the shadowy ships that loomed over their cities, they realized that the real battle was not against alien invaders or external threats. It was against the growing realization that they were no longer masters of their own destiny. The Deathworlders had come, and they would not leave, not until their own goals had been achieved. Earth's victory in battle had been hard-won, but it was also a victory that would cost them more than they could have ever imagined. The Deathworlders' grip on the planet was tightening, and humanity was caught in the middle of a war that was no longer their own. The question now was not how to survive, but how to keep from being consumed by the very forces that had promised to protect them. The battle was over, but the war for humanity's soul was just beginning. The aftermath and uncertain future. Dust from the battle settled, but the tension in the air remained thick. Earth had survived, but not without a heavy toll. The alien invaders had been pushed back, and humanity was no longer facing immediate extinction. Yet, the victory felt bittersweet. The skies, once filled with chaos, now hung eerily quiet, as if nature itself was waiting to see what would unfold next. In the silence, the true cost of survival began to sink in. The Deathworlders' ships still loomed overhead, casting long, unyielding shadows across Earth's cities. Their presence was no longer a temporary measure, it was permanent. The Earth's leaders, once confident in their autonomy, now stood under the watchful eyes of the Deathworlders. Knowing that their every decision would be scrutinized, controlled, and often dictated. Earth was no longer a free planet. Humanity had made a deal with these ancient, ruthless beings. In exchange for their protection, Earth had traded its sovereignty. The Deathworlders didn't demand worship, nor did they demand love. They demanded compliance. The planet's resources, its military, and even its future were now under their jurisdiction. Humanity was left to pick up the pieces of a world that had been broken. While the Deathworlders waited, ever present in the background, watching for the next move, Earth's people could feel at the shift in their world. They were not free anymore. They were surviving, but at what cost? How long would it be before they lost everything that made them human? These questions hung over the minds of leaders, civilians, and soldiers alike. Every individual had to grapple with the reality of what their world had become. Some accepted it, clinging to the hope that the Deathworlders' power would be the key to a new age of peace and progress. Others saw only the chains that bound them to a cold and calculating force that showed no mercy. Across the world, the mood was divided. In some places, there was a quiet acceptance. The Deathworlders' protection had proven effective, and the immediate threat of annihilation was gone. For those who had lost loved ones in the war, the presence of the Deathworlders was a necessary evil, a shield that kept them alive. But for others, the pain of surrendering control to these alien overlords was too much to bear. Whispers of rebellion began to circulate in the dark corners of the Earth, where hope still clung to the belief that humanity could rise again and reclaim its autonomy. In the corridors of power, Earth's leaders sat in tense meetings, attempting to navigate the fine line between cooperation and submission. The Deathworlders had made it clear that their protection was not a free service. There would be further demands. Earth had to comply or face the consequences. But what would those consequences be? No one could say for sure. The Deathworlders were inscrutable, calculating, cold, and efficient. They didn't seem to care about the lives of individual humans. They cared only about the survival of the pact, the survival of their power. As Earth's leaders looked up at the great ships in the sky, they were reminded of the price they had paid. They had traded their freedom, their sovereignty, and perhaps their future for survival. But would it be enough? Could humanity ever truly live in peace under the rule of the Deathworlders? Or had they merely exchanged one form of tyranny for another? The first few months of the New World were marked by uneasy cooperation. Earth's governments, now under the influence of their new overlords, began to restructure their priorities. The Deathworlders provided the technology and the military might that Earth needed to secure its future. In return, humanity worked to fulfill the Deathworlders' demands. It was a relationship built on fear and necessity, mutual survival, but without trust or understanding. The Deathworlders, for their part, remained enigmatic. They did not offer comfort or sympathy. They offered only what was needed to maintain the fragile balance between them and Earth. Their motives were unclear. Were they truly invested in Earth's future, or were they simply biding their time, preparing for a larger conquest? Every action they took, every decision they made, left the people of Earth with more questions than answers. But amidst the uncertainty, a new kind of tension began to rise. As Earth citizens adjusted to the new world order, the very nature of their existence began to shift. The constant presence of the Deathworlders, their unblinking eyes always watching, began to erode the sense of freedom that had once been so integral to humanity. People began to feel like pawns in a game they didn't understand. The very idea of survival, once so precious, now seemed hollow in the face of such overwhelming control. Yet, even in the darkest corners of Earth, a new hope began to spark. Small groups of resistance formed, not necessarily to overthrow the Deathworlders, but to reclaim humanity's spirit. They were not fighting with weapons, but with ideas. They wanted to remind the world that they were more than just survivors. They were people, with the capacity to shape their own fate. These resistance groups were not organized in the way the Deathworlders had anticipated. They were not an army. They were whispers in the night, hidden beneath the veil of an otherwise compliant society. The Deathworlders, though seemingly invincible, had underestimated humanity's will to survive. Theirs was a cold, calculated power, but it was not unbreakable. The whispers of rebellion grew louder with every passing day. They were not calling for war, not yet, but they were calling for something far more dangerous to the Deathworlders: hope. And so, as Earth moved forward in the shadow of the Deathworlders' ships, humanity was not defeated. Not yet. It was merely biding its time, learning to survive under a new rule. But beneath the surface, the fire of defiance still burned, and one day, when the time was right, that fire would ignite. The Deathworlders may have won the battle, but humanity had not yet lost the war.